The camera flash illuminated the alley for a split second, capturing the breathtaking graffiti that sprawled across the brick wall like a symphony of colors in the darkness. Anya Petrova lowered her camera, her breath forming small clouds in the cold Manhattan night air as she studied the masterpiece before her. The piece was extraordinary layers of spray paint creating an almost three-dimensional effect with shadows and light dancing across a figure that seemed to be reaching towards something just beyond the frame. Delete those photos. Now! The voice cut through the silence like a blade deep and commanding, with an edge that made her spine straighten involuntarily. Anya spun around her heart, hammering against her ribs as a figure emerged from the shadows at the mouth of the alley. Even in the dim streetlight, she could make out the expensive cut of his charcoal suit, the way he moved with predatory grace, and those steel gray eyes that seemed to pierce straight through her. Liam Parker. The name hit her like a physical blow. I said delete them! He stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, paint fumes. That piece belongs to me. Anya's fingers tightened around her camera, her mind racing. This was him, the ruthless CEO she'd been hired to watch, to get close to find dirt on. But what the hell was Liam Parker doing in a back alley at midnight? And how could a piece of street art belong to someone like him? Last I checked, graffiti doesn't come with ownership papers. She managed forcing her voice to sound steadier than she felt. This is public property. Something flickered across his features. Surprised maybe that she dared to challenge him. Most people probably cowered when Liam Parker spoke. But Anya had grown up in foster care, had clawed her way through art school on scholarships, in part-time jobs, and she wasn't about to be intimidated by some corporate shark, no matter how devastatingly handsome he was. You have no idea what you're talking about. His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Delete the photos or I'll make sure that camera never works again. Try it. The words were out before she could stop them, fueled by years of having to stand up for herself and a sudden, inexplicable rage at his arrogance. I'm documenting art, not committing a crime. This piece is incredible. Whoever Phantom is, they're a genius. The change in him was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid, and for a moment something raw and vulnerable flashed across his features before the mask slammed back down. What did you say? Phantom, she repeated, confused by his reaction. The signature in the corner. Everyone in the art world knows about Phantom, the mysterious street artist who disappeared 3 years ago. This looks like their work, but it can't be because Phantom is dead. The words came out flat, final, and loaded with something that sounded almost like grief. Anya stared at him, her mind spinning. How would Liam Parker, tech mogul and notorious corporate raider, know anything about an underground street artist? Unless... You knew him, she whispered, the pieces clicking together in a way that made no sense. You knew Phantom. For a long moment they stood frozen in the alley, the city's distant hum filling the silence between them. Liam's jaw worked like he was fighting some internal battle, and Anya found herself studying his face, the sharp cheekbones, the way his dark hair fell just slightly across his forehead, the exhaustion that seemed carved into the lines around his eyes. Who are you? He asked finally, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. Anya Petrova. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. I'm a graphic designer. And you just happened to be wandering through back alleys at midnight taking pictures? Heat flooded her cheeks. The truth that she was here, because Marcus Reed had paid her to spy on him, had told her she might find compromising information about his business dealings, was impossible to explain. I'm working on a project about urban art. This city is full of incredible pieces if you know where to look. He studied her for another long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her carefully constructed lies. Finally, he pulled out his phone. How much? He asked. What? For the photos. Name your price. Anya blinked, caught off guard. They're not for sale. Everything's for sale. He said it like a law of physics, unchangeable and absolute. 50,000. The number hit her like a slap. $50,000, enough to save her father's art gallery, enough to pay off the loans that were slowly strangling them both. But something in his desperation, in the way he was trying to buy her silence, made her dig in her heels. I told you they're not for sale. This is public art. 100,000. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Anya's breath caught in her throat. $100,000. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life, more than enough to solve every financial problem she had. And all she had to do was delete a few photos. But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something beneath the cold corporate mask. Pain. Loss. The kind of grief that carved itself into your bones and never let go. Whatever connection he had to this art to Phantom, it went deeper than business. Why? She asked quietly. Why is this so important to you? For a moment she thought he might actually answer. His guard dropped just slightly, and she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable and raw. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and when he looked up from the screen, the CEO mask was firmly back in place. Ms. Petrova, he said her name like he was testing it, rolling it around on his tongue. I have a proposition for you, one that will be far more lucrative than selling street photography. I'm listening. I need a girlfriend. The words were so unexpected, so completely removed from everything that had just happened, that Anya actually laughed. Excuse me. Not a real girlfriend, he clarified, his tone businesslike now. A contract arrangement. 3 months, $100,000 plus expenses. All you have to do is convince some very important people that we're in love. Anya stared at him, her mind reeling. This was insane. He was insane. And yet, why me? Because you're perfect. He stepped closer, and she caught that scent again. Definitely paint fumes beneath the expensive cologne. You're beautiful but not plastic. Artistic but not starving. Independent but not untouchable. You're exactly what they'll expect me to choose. They, the Artemis Group, potential investors who believe in the importance of family values and emotional stability in their business partners. His lips curved in what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. They want to see that I'm capable of human connection before they trust me with their money. And you're not. Something flickered in his eyes again. What do you think? Anya looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the expensive suit that couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the perfectly styled hair that couldn't disguise the exhaustion in his face, the controlled posture that screamed of someone holding himself together through sheer force of will. This was Liam Parker, the man Marcus Reed had described as a soulless corporate machine who destroyed everything he touched. But standing here in this alley surrounded by illegal art that clearly meant something profound to him, he seemed like someone else entirely. Someone damaged, someone hiding, someone who might just be as lost as she was. I need to think about it, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. He pulled out a business card and held it out to her. My private number's on the back. Call me with your decision. As she took the card, their fingers brushed, and she felt an unexpected jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. His eyes met hers, and for just a moment, the corporate mask slipped again. For what it's worth, he said quietly, Phantom isn't dead. He's just sleeping. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Anya standing alone in the alley with a camera full of photos, a head full of questions, and the distinct feeling that her entire life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. As his footsteps faded into the distance, she looked back at the graffiti on the wall. In the bottom right corner, almost hidden among the swirls of color, was the signature that had started this whole strange encounter, a small, elegant P surrounded by shadows that seemed to dance in the streetlight. Phantom. She thought about Liam's words, about the grief in his voice, when he'd said the name, about the way he'd known exactly where to find this piece in a city full of millions of walls. And suddenly, impossible as it seemed, she began to suspect that Liam Parker's secrets went far deeper than corporate espionage or shady business deals. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Any progress time is running out. Anya stared at the message, then at the business card in her hand, then back at the beautiful, haunting graffiti that seemed to pulse with life in the darkness. Tomorrow morning she would have to make a choice that would change everything. But tonight, standing in this alley with the scent of paint and possibility in the air, she allowed herself to wonder, what if the man she was supposed to destroy was the key to saving everything she'd ever cared about? Anya stood before the glass tower that housed Parker Technologies, her reflection wavering in the polished surface like a mirage. The building stretched endlessly upward, a monument to wealth and power that made her feel impossibly small in her thrift store blazer and scuffed boots. She clutched the business card so tightly her knuckles had gone white, the embossed letters seeming to mock her with their understated elegance. She shouldn't be here. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was insane, accepting a fake relationship contract with a man she'd met 12 hours ago in a dark alley, a man who was supposed to be her target, not her employer. But the memory of Marcus Reed's latest phone call echoed in her mind. The gallery has 2 weeks, Anya. 2 weeks before the bank forecloses. Find me something on Parker, or watch your father's life work disappear forever. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending to another world. When the doors opened, Anya stepped into a reception area that probably cost more than most people's houses, all sleek, marble contemporary art and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Manhattan. The receptionist, a stunning blonde who looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, barely glanced up from her computer. Miss Petrova, Mr. Parker is waiting for you in the executive conference room. The conference room was a study in intimidation, a massive black table surrounded by leather chairs with one wall entirely made of glass overlooking the city. But it was the man standing with his back to her, silhouetted against the window, who made her breath catch. In daylight, Liam Parker was even more devastating than he'd been in the alley. The perfectly tailored navy suit emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame, while the morning light caught the subtle auburn highlights in his dark hair. He turned as she entered, and those steel-gray eyes assessed her with the same intensity as the night before. "You came." "I'm here," she said, which wasn't quite the same thing. "Though I'm still not sure why." "Because you need the money." His bluntness was like a slap, but not entirely wrong. "And because you're curious about what I'm really offering." He gestured to a chair across from him, and as she sat, she noticed the tablet on the table, displaying what looked like a contract. The sight of all that legal text made her stomach lurch. "Before we discuss terms," Liam said, settling into his chair with predatory grace, "I need to know something. Who sent you to that alley last night?" The question hit her like ice water. "What do you mean, don't?" His voice carried a warning that made her spine straighten. "I've been in business long enough to recognize a setup when I see one. Freelance graphic designers don't typically wander through back alleys at midnight, photographing street art, especially not alleys 3 blocks from my office building." Anya's mind raced. How much did he know? How much should she admit? "I told you I'm working on a project." "Bullshit." He leaned forward and she caught that same scent from the night before expensive cologne with an undertone of something else. "I had my security team pull footage from the surrounding blocks. You've been watching this building for 3 days." Her blood turned to ice. Of course he had security teams. Of course he'd checked. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. The question is whether you'll tell me the truth or try to spin another story." He picked up the tablet and slid it across the table toward her. "This contract is worth $100,000, Miss Petrova, but lies will void it faster than a signature." Anya stared at the tablet, her heart hammering. The truth would destroy everything: Marcus's plan, her chance at the money, probably her safety if Marcus found out she'd been compromised. But looking at Liam's face, she realized he already knew more than he was saying. And there was something about the way he'd spoken about Phantom the night before, something raw and vulnerable that made her want to be honest with him. "Marcus Reed," she said quietly. "He hired me to watch you." Something flickered across Liam's features, not surprise, but something darker. "Marcus Reed, of course." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. "What did he tell you about me?" "That you destroyed his company, that you're ruthless and soulless, and you'll do anything to win." The words felt hollow as she spoke them, especially looking at him now. "He said you ruined his life." "And what was your job supposed to be?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "Find compromising information. Take photos, record conversations, anything that could be used against you in business. And instead, I'm offering to pay you $100,000 to pretend to be my girlfriend." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Life has an interesting sense of humor. "Why?" the question burst out of her. "Why would you still want to hire me knowing what I was sent to do?" He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. Because you told me the truth, and because Marcus Reed sending you tells me everything I need to know about how desperate he's getting. Desperate for what? Revenge. Liam stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Marcus Reed didn't lose his company because I destroyed it, Miss Petrova. He lost it because he was embezzling from his clients to fund his gambling addiction. I simply bought the assets when it collapsed. The words hit her like a physical blow. That's not, he said. He said I was the villain in his story, and maybe that's easier for him to believe than accepting responsibility for his own failures. Liam turned back to face her. The question is, what do you believe? Anya's mind reeled. Everything Marcus had told her, everything she'd believed about this man was crumbling. I don't know what to believe anymore. Then let me make it simple. He walked back to the table and sat down, his gaze never leaving her face. I'm offering you a contract that will solve your financial problems and give you a chance to see who I really am. In return, you play the role of my devoted girlfriend for 3 months. No physical intimacy required, just public appearances and the ability to convince some very conservative investors that I'm capable of human emotion. And if I say no, then you walk away with no harm done. But you'll never know whether I'm the monster Marcus painted or something else entirely. The tablet seemed to pulse with possibility on the table between them. $100,000. Enough to save the gallery, enough to free herself from Marcus's manipulation. But it would mean lying, pretending, living a completely false life for 3 months. What exactly would this entail, she asked. Public appearances, charity galas, business dinners, occasional weekend trips. You'd need to move into my penthouse. The Artemis Group will expect us to be living together. He said it matter-of-factly, as if inviting a stranger to live with him was perfectly normal. You'll have your own room, your own space. This is business, not pleasure. And after 3 months, we have a very public, very amicable breakup. You keep the money, I get my deal, everyone wins. Anya looked at the contract, the legal text swimming before her eyes. I need guarantees. About the money, about my safety. Of course. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen, a sleek, expensive thing that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The payment schedule is outlined in Section 3. $50,000 up front, $50,000 on completion. All living expenses covered, plus a clothing allowance. Clothing allowance. You'll need appropriate attire for the events we'll be attending. Consider it a work uniform. The casual way he said it, as if dropping thousands of dollars on clothes, was nothing, reminded her sharply of the gulf between their worlds. And what happens if this blows up, if people find out it's fake? It won't blow up if we're convincing. His eyes met hers and she saw something there, not just confidence but challenge. The question is, are you a good enough actress to make them believe you're falling for me? The words hung in the air between them, loaded with more meaning than either wanted to acknowledge. Because the truth was sitting here in this glass tower, looking at this complicated, damaged, fascinating man, Anya wasn't sure she'd need to act at all. One more thing, she said, trying to regain her equilibrium. Last night in the alley, you knew that artist, Phantom. You knew him personally. Liam's expression shuddered immediately. That's not part of this contract, but it's part of who you are. She leaned forward, studying his face. You're not just some corporate robot, are you? There's more to you than the suits in the boardrooms. Miss Petrova, his voice carried a warning. Some doors are better left closed. Maybe, or maybe they're the only doors worth opening. For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flickered across his features, the same expression she'd seen in the alley when she'd mentioned Phantom's name. Then his phone buzzed, breaking the spell, and when he looked up, the CEO mask was firmly back in place. I need an answer, he said. The Artemis Group dinner is tomorrow night. Anya looked at the contract, at the man across from her, at the city sprawling endlessly beyond the windows. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, destroy him. But sitting here, seeing the exhaustion carved into Liam's features and the careful way he held himself together, destruction felt like the last thing she wanted to do. If I sign this, she said slowly, I want your word that you'll be honest with me. Maybe not about everything, but about the things that matter. And what things matter, Miss Petrova? The things that keep you awake at night, The things that made you build walls so high you need to pay someone to pretend to love you. The words hit their target. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his hands stilled on the table. For a long moment they stared at each other across the polished surface, and she had the feeling they were negotiating something far more dangerous than a business contract. 3 months, he said finally, and then we both go back to our separate lives. 3 months, she agreed, reaching for the pen. As she signed her name on the dotted line, Anya couldn't shake the feeling that she was signing away more than just 3 months of her life. Because looking at Liam Parker, really looking at him, she was beginning to suspect that the most dangerous part of this arrangement wouldn't be pretending to love him. It would be trying not to. The ink was barely dry when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Parker, your stylist is here for Ms. Petrova's consultation." "Stylist?" Anya looked up startled. Liam's smile was sharp as a blade. "Welcome to my world, Ms. Petrova. I hope you're ready for a complete transformation." As a woman in an impeccably tailored suit entered the room, carrying what looked like a portable fashion emergency kit, Anya realized that signing the contract had been the easy part. The hard part, convincing the world that someone like her could capture the heart of someone like him, was just beginning. But as she watched Liam study her with those intense gray eyes, she couldn't help wondering who exactly was going to be transforming whom. The penthouse felt like stepping into a magazine spread all clean lines, muted colors, and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan that should have been breathtaking but instead felt cold and impersonal. Like a beautiful prison, Anya thought as she set her single battered suitcase down in the guest bedroom. "Your room," Liam said from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. He'd changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. The casual clothes should have made him seem more approachable, but somehow they only highlighted how perfectly controlled he was in every aspect of his life. "It's beautiful," she said, which was true. The room was easily 3 times the size of her entire studio apartment, with its own marble bathroom and a walk-in closet that currently housed about $50,000 worth of clothes the stylist had selected for her. "Thank you. The Artemis Group dinner's in 2 hours. I'll need you ready by 7:30. All business, she noted. No small talk, no attempt to make her feel welcome. Just the facts. "And what exactly am I supposed to be at this dinner? Your devoted girlfriend. Your arm candy. You're less my equal." The answer surprised her. The Artemis Group consists of 3 married couples who've been together for decades. They believe in partnerships, not transactions. "You're not my accessory, Anya. You're supposed to be the woman who compliments me, challenges me, makes me better than I am alone." There was something in his voice, a note of longing, so carefully hidden, she almost missed it. "And you think I can pull that off?" "We'll find out." He moved to leave, then paused. "The bathroom is stocked with everything you should need. If there's anything else..." He gestured vaguely as if the concept of personal needs was foreign to him. "Liam." He turned back and she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his expression before he shuttered it away. "This is going to work better if we actually know something about each other, beyond contracts and business arrangements. What do you want to know?" Everything, she thought. Why you were in that alley. Why mentioning Phantom makes you look like you're in pain. Why you built this beautiful, empty fortress and locked yourself inside it. But she settled for something safer. How did we meet in this fictional relationship of ours? He considered this. Art gallery opening. You were standing in front of a piece, and I was struck by how completely absorbed you were. When I approached you, you told me the artist was wrong about light, that they'd painted shadows where there should have been illumination. The specificity of it caught her off guard. That's very detailed for something you just made up. I don't make things up, Anya. I plan them. But there was something in his eyes that suggested this particular story came from somewhere deeper than planning. After he left, she stood in the enormous bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. The stylist had worked magic. The deep blue dress hugged her curves without being obvious about it. The jewelry was understated, but expensive, and her hair fell in soft waves that looked effortless, but had taken an hour to achieve. She looked like she belonged in Liam's world. The problem was she didn't feel like herself at all. The Artemis Group dinner was held at an exclusive private club, that reeked of old money and older traditions. As they entered the ornate dining room, Liam's hand settled on the small of her back, a possessive gesture that sent unexpected heat shooting through her. The six people waiting for them looked exactly like what she'd expected, wealthy, conservative, and absolutely certain of their place in the world. Liam, the woman who approached them, was in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. You must be Anya. I'm Catherine Artemis. It's lovely to meet you, Anya said, accepting the woman's warm handshake. We've been so curious about the woman who finally captured our elusive Liam's heart. Catherine's smile was genuine, but her eyes were assessing. He's been stubbornly single for so long, we were beginning to think he was immune to love. Just selective, Liam said smoothly, his arm sliding around Anya's waist. The casual intimacy of the gesture made her pulse quicken. I was waiting for someone worth waiting for. Ah. The words were perfectly calculated, exactly what their audience wanted to hear. So why did they make her chest tighten with something that felt dangerously like hope? Dinner was a careful dance of questions and observations. The Artemis group was smart. They didn't interrogate directly, but asked the kind of casual questions that would trip up anyone trying to fake a relationship. How did Liam take his coffee? What was Anya's favorite thing about him? Did they have any traditions together? Liam fielded each question with the skill of someone who'd built an empire on reading people, but Anya found herself studying him as much as their hosts. When Catherine asked about their first fight, he talked about Anya challenging his assumption that art was just decoration. When someone mentioned travel, he described a fictional weekend in the Hamptons, where Anya had insisted on visiting local galleries instead of the beach clubs. Every story positioned her as his intellectual equal, someone who pushed him and inspired him. It was flattering and completely fictional, but delivered with such conviction that she almost believed it herself. And what do you love most about Liam? Asked Richard Artemis, Catherine's husband, as dessert was served. The question caught her off guard. She'd been prepared for the obvious ones, how they met, where they went on dates, but this required her to think about Liam as more than just her temporary employer. She looked at him, taking in the way he held himself, with such careful control, the exhaustion he couldn't quite hide, the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. His layers, she said finally. Everyone sees the successful businessman, but there's so much more beneath that. He notices things, art, beauty, the way light falls through windows. He pretends he doesn't care about anything beyond profit margins, but he keeps fresh flowers in his office, even though no one ever visits it. She'd made up the detail about the flowers, but something in Liam's expression told her she'd hit closer to truth than fiction. His hand found hers under the table fingers, interlacing in a gesture that felt less like performance and more like gratitude. And Liam, Catherine prompted, what drew you to Anya? Her passion, he said without hesitation. She sees the world differently than I do. Where I see systems and structures, she sees possibility. She makes me remember why I fell in love with creating things in the first place, instead of just acquiring them. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with more truth than either had expected. Anya felt her breath catch as their eyes met across the table. For a moment, the rest of the room faded away, and it was just the two of them, sitting in a bubble of shared understanding. The spell was broken when Catherine laughed delightedly. Oh, you two are perfect together. Richard, don't you think they're perfect? As they walked back to the car after dinner, the New York night air was crisp with the promise of autumn. Liam was quiet, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and Anya found herself studying his profile in the streetlight. That went well, she said finally. Better than well. They're completely convinced. He glanced at her. You're a better actress than I expected. The compliment should have pleased her, but instead it stung. Is that what you think I was doing? Acting. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Weren't you? She opened her mouth to say yes. Of course, that's what this whole arrangement was about. But the words wouldn't come. Because standing there looking at him, remembering the way he described her to the Artemis group, the way his hand had felt in hers, she wasn't sure where the performance ended and something real began. I don't know, she said honestly. Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or something more dangerous. They stood there on the sidewalk, the city bustling around them, caught in a moment that felt suspended outside of time. Anya. Her name on his lips sounded different than it had before. Softer, more personal. "We should go home," she said quickly, stepping back. "I mean to your place, not home. Obviously, it's not my home." But as they drove through the city in silence, she couldn't shake the feeling that home was exactly what his penthouse was starting to feel like. And that was a problem she hadn't anticipated when she'd signed that contract. Back at the penthouse, they stood in the living room, with its panoramic view, both of them suddenly awkward now that the performance was over. The silence stretched between them, filled with things neither seemed ready to say. "Thank you," Liam said finally, "for tonight. You were perfect. Just doing my job." "Right, your job." But he didn't move toward his room, and neither did she. "Liam." She turned to face him fully. "When you described me to them tonight, the way you said I see the world, how did you know that we've known each other for less than 48 hours? He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because that's how you looked at that graffiti in the alley. Like it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen, like it meant something beyond just paint on a wall." It did mean something. Phantom's work always does. That's what made them so special. They could take something ugly and forgotten and make it breathtaking. Past tense. You said Phantom was dead. I said Phantom was sleeping. His eyes met hers, and she saw something raw and unguarded there. Sometimes the person we used to be feels so far away, it's easier to think of them as gone forever. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was quite brave enough to cross. Anya felt her heart hammering against her ribs as pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place. "Liam," she said carefully, "if Phantom isn't dead, if they're just sleeping, what would it take to wake them up?" For a moment his mask slipped completely, and she saw the artist hiding beneath the CEO, vulnerable, damaged, but still burning with creative fire. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment, and when he looked up from the screen, the walls were back in place. "Good night, Anya," he said, his voice carefully neutral again. "Sweet dreams." As she watched him disappear into his room, Anya stood alone in the beautiful, empty living room and wondered what she was really doing here, because it was becoming increasingly clear that Liam Parker was nothing like the man Marcus had described. He wasn't a soulless corporate machine. He was an artist who'd buried his talent so deep he'd forgotten how to find it again. And despite every warning bell in her head, despite the contract and the lies and the complicated web of deception they were both caught in, she was starting to fall for him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, as she got ready for bed in the gorgeous guest room, Anya found herself wondering what would happen if she stopped trying to protect her heart and started trying to wake up his sleeping artist instead. Outside her window, the city glittered with a million points of light, and somewhere in the distance she could swear she smelled fresh paint on the wind. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Anya had almost convinced herself that this could work, that she could live in this beautiful glass tower, attend elegant dinners where Liam introduced her as the woman who'd changed his life, and ignore the way her heart jumped every time he looked at her like she was something precious. She'd almost convinced herself that the growing intimacy between them, the casual touches, the shared glances, the late-night conversations about art and dreams was just them getting better at their roles. Then Marcus Reed walked into the Artemis Group's final presentation like a ghost from her past, and everything shattered. The meeting was supposed to be a formality. The Artemis Group had been impressed by Liam and Anya's relationship, charmed by their obvious connection, and ready to sign the partnership agreement that would inject $50 million into Parker Technologies. Anya had chosen her outfit carefully, a sophisticated burgundy dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and feminine, and arrived at the conference room feeling confident. She should have known it was too easy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine Artemis announced as the presentations concluded, "I'd like you to meet our final consultant on this project, Marcus Reed of Reed Enterprises." The blood drained from Anya's face as Marcus walked through the door, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and silver hair. But it was his smile, cold, calculating, and directed straight at her, that made her stomach drop to her feet. Across the table, she felt Liam go completely still. When she dared to glance at him, his face was a mask of controlled fury that she'd never seen before. His hands, she noticed, were clenched into fists on the table. "Mr. Parker," Marcus said smoothly, extending his hand. "Such a pleasure to finally meet you in person." "Mr. Reed," Liam's voice was ice. "I wasn't aware you were consulting with Artemis Group." "Oh, it's a recent development. When Catherine mentioned they were considering a partnership with you, I simply had to offer my expertise." Marcus's eyes found Anya's again, and she saw the threat there. "After all, I have such intimate knowledge of your business practices." "How wonderful," Catherine said, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Marcus, you must meet Liam's girlfriend, Anya Petrova." The moment stretched like a held breath. Anya felt trapped between two predators, each waiting for her to make the wrong move. Marcus's smile widened as he approached her. "Anya," he said, taking her hand and holding it just a moment too long. "What a lovely surprise. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, you always did have excellent taste in men." The implication was clear to everyone in the room. Richard Artemis raised an eyebrow while Catherine looked confused, but it was Liam's reaction that made Anya's heart stop. She saw the exact moment he understood, the way his face went blank, the way something died in his eyes. "You two know each other?" Catherine asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Oh, yes," Marcus said, his arms sliding around Anya's shoulders in a gesture that made her skin crawl. "Anya is practically family. I've been her father figure since she was 16. The room fell silent. Anya could feel Liam's gaze boring into her, could practically hear his thoughts as the pieces clicked into place. She was the daughter of his enemy, planted in his life, sleeping in his home, playing with his emotions for money and information. "How nice," Catherine said finally, but her tone had cooled considerably. "Well, shall we continue with the presentation?" The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of corporate speak and carefully neutral expressions. Anya sat frozen in her chair, watching her carefully constructed world collapse around her. Every time Marcus spoke, he dropped another subtle bomb, mentioning her loyalty to family, her talent for understanding people's weaknesses, her gift for getting close to the right people. By the time the meeting ended, the Artemis Group's enthusiasm had evaporated. They were polite but distant, promising to review everything carefully before making their decision. It was corporate speak for thanks but no thanks. As people filed out of the conference room, Marcus lingered, his hand still possessively on Anya's shoulder. "Liam," he said conversationally, "might I have a word with you privately?" "Actually," Liam's voice was deadly calm, "I think the three of us should talk." The door closed behind the last Artemis Group member, leaving them alone in the glass-walled conference room. The silence was deafening. "Well," Marcus said, finally settling into a chair like he owned the place. "This is cozy. What do you want?" Liam's voice could have cut glass. "When I have everything I want. The Artemis Group will never trust you now, not after learning that your girlfriend is the daughter of your supposed enemy. They'll assume it's all an elaborate con game." Marcus smiled. "Which of course it is." Anya found her voice at last. "Marcus, stop." "Stop," he laughed. "Darling, I'm just getting started. You see, Liam, I've been planning this for 3 years, ever since you destroyed my company and left me with nothing." "You destroyed your own company," Liam said flatly. "I just bought the pieces." "Semantics," Marcus waved dismissively. "The point is, you took everything from me. My business, my reputation, my future. So I decided to return the favor. By using her." Liam's eyes found Anya's, and the pain there made her chest ache. "By giving her what she needed," Marcus corrected. "Money for her precious art gallery, a purpose, a way to help the man who raised her. All she had to do was get close to you, learn your secrets, and wait for the perfect moment to destroy you." "That's not," Anya started, but Marcus cut her off. "Isn't it? Tell me, darling, what was the plan if I hadn't shown up today? Were you going to string him along for the full 3 months before breaking his heart? Or had you found something better, some deeper secret you could exploit?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. Anya saw Liam flinch, saw him retreat behind walls she'd spent weeks trying to tear down. "Liam, that's not what this is. I never what?" Marcus's voice was silky with false sympathy. "Never lied to him, never pretended to care, never let him believe you might actually have feelings for him." "Enough." Liam's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. You win, Marcus. Congratulations. Liam, please. Anya stood too, reaching for him. Let me explain. Explain what? He stepped back from her touch like it burned. That everything between us has been a lie. That you've been reporting back to him this entire time. That I was stupid enough to think. He stopped, his jaw working. It doesn't matter what I thought. But it does matter. The words burst out of her, desperate and raw. Because I never reported anything to him. Because I stopped answering his calls weeks ago. Because everything I felt, everything I feel is real. Marcus laughed. How touching. The little spy thinks she's fallen for her mark. I'm not a spy. Anya whirled on him, months of frustration and manipulation finally boiling over. I never wanted any part of this. You blackmailed me, threatened to destroy the gallery if I didn't help you. But I never gave you anything useful, and I never planned to. Didn't you? Marcus's smile was razor sharp. Then explain this. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Suddenly Liam's voice filled the room, their conversation from 3 nights ago, when he'd finally opened up about his sister, about the guilt that drove him to abandon art, about the empty penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Anya's blood turned to ice. How did you? Your phone, darling. You really should read those user agreements more carefully. I've been recording every conversation you've had since you moved in with him. The betrayal hit her like a sledgehammer. Not just that Marcus had been listening, but that Liam would think she'd known. That he would believe she'd willingly shared his most private moments with his enemy. You son of a bitch, she breathed. Language, darling, though I suppose it doesn't matter now. Marcus stood smoothing his tie. The damage is done. The Artemis Group will never trust him, not after this. His reputation is shot, his business will suffer, and he'll spend years rebuilding what I've torn down in a single afternoon. He moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Liam, just so we're clear, every word she said to you, every laugh, every touch, every moment you thought was real, I orchestrated all of it. She's a very good actress, I'll give her that. Almost good enough to make you forget that people like us don't get fairy tale endings. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Anya and Liam alone in the wreckage of everything they'd built together. Liam, her voice broke on his name. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't know about the recordings. I never gave him anything willingly. He stood with his back to her, staring out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters, I love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and desperate, and completely true. She'd said them without thinking, but she meant them with every fiber of her being. No. He turned to face her, and the emptiness in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. You love the idea of me, the fantasy Marcus created for you to fall for? That's not true. Isn't it? How much of what you know about me is real, Anya? How much was just part of the performance? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because the truth was, she wasn't entirely sure where the real Liam ended and the character he'd created for the Artemis Group began. I thought so. His smile was bitter. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and leave. The money will be transferred to your account, considerate payment for services rendered, and we're never going to see each other again. Liam, please. The contract is terminated, Anya, effective immediately. He walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. For what it's worth, you were very convincing. I almost believed you cared. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the conference room with the echoes of her own broken heart and the devastating realization that in trying to save her father's gallery, she'd destroyed the only thing that had ever truly mattered to her. As she stood there in her beautiful burgundy dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life, Anya finally understood what Marcus had meant about fairy tale endings. Because sometimes the princess doesn't get the prince. Sometimes she just gets what she deserves. But as she thought about Liam, really thought about him, about the pain in his eyes and the walls he'd spent years building, she realized that maybe the story wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still time to prove that some things were worth fighting for, even when everything seemed lost. Especially then. The question was, did she have the courage to fight for love when love had already walked away. The gallery was dying. Anya could feel it in the stale air, see it in the dust motes dancing through the afternoon sunlight that streamed through unwashed windows. Paint peeled from the walls like old skin, and the few remaining pieces hung askew, abandoned by artists who could no longer afford to show here. She sat on the floor in the center of the empty space, surrounded by cardboard boxes and a lifetime of memories, trying to find the strength to pack away her father's legacy. The money from Liam had arrived in her account exactly as promised, $100,000 that should have solved everything. Instead, it felt like blood money payment for services that had cost her far more than she'd ever imagined. The gallery doors chimed as someone entered, and Anya looked up expecting to see the landlord coming for his final walkthrough. Instead, she found herself staring at a woman in her 70s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. Ms. Petrova. The woman's voice was cultured, faintly accented. I'm Elena Volkov. The name meant nothing to Anya, but there was something about the woman's presence that commanded attention. I'm sorry, but we're closed. Permanently. I know. Elena moved through the space with the confidence of someone who understood art, pausing before a canvas that Anya's father had painted years ago, a vibrant street scene that captured the chaos and beauty of urban life. Your father was very talented. You knew him. We corresponded for many years. He wrote to me about you, about your passion for art, about his fears for this place. Elena turned to face her fully. He also wrote about a young man who used to visit here as a teenager, someone who understood art the way most people understand breathing. Anya's heart clenched. If you're here about Liam, I'm here about truth. Elena settled into the chair across from where Anya sat on the floor, and about a story that's been buried for far too long. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a leather portfolio, placing it on the small table between them. 20 years ago, I was a curator at the Whitney. Your father was one of my most promising discoveries, a street artist who captured the soul of the city in ways that established artists never could. Anya's breath caught. My father showed at the Whitney. He was supposed to. We had planned a major exhibition, one that would have launched his career into the stratosphere. Elena's expression grew sad. But then Marcus Reed happened. The name hit like a physical blow. Marcus. But he said he was my father's friend, that he helped him. Marcus Reed was many things, but your father's friend was not one of them. Elena opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed newspaper clippings and exhibition catalogs. He was a failed artist himself, bitter and jealous of anyone with real talent. When he learned about your father's upcoming Whitney show, he launched a campaign to destroy him. Anya's hands shook as she reached for the papers. The headline of the first article made her stomach drop. Street artist accused of vandalism and theft. He fabricated evidence, Elena continued quietly. Claimed your father had stolen his work, that the pieces scheduled for the Whitney were plagiarized. By the time we could prove the accusations were false, the damage was done. Your father's reputation was ruined, and he retreated from the art world entirely. But Marcus raised me, Anya whispered, her world tilting on its axis. After my father died, he took me in. Guilt, perhaps, or a way to keep tabs on the daughter of the man he'd destroyed. Elena's voice was gentle but implacable. Your father never stopped loving art, but he never showed publicly again. Instead, he poured everything into this gallery, hoping to give other artists the chances he'd lost. Tears blurred Anya's vision as she flipped through the portfolio. There were photos of her father's work pieces she'd never seen, vibrant and alive with the same energy she'd recognized in Phantom's graffiti. And there in the margins of several exhibition notes, she saw a familiar signature. LP, promising young visitor, sees art like breathing. Liam, she breathed. Liam Parker was 17 when he first visited your father's studio, Elena confirmed. A lost boy with more artistic talent than he knew what to do with. Your father became his mentor, taught him to see art not just as decoration, but as communication, as a way to touch souls. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. That's how he learned to be Phantom. Your father encouraged him to take his art to the streets to speak to people who would never set foot in a gallery. Liam's graffiti became legendary because it carried your father's teachings that art should be alive, accessible, transformative. Anya clutched the papers to her chest, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. But why are you telling me this now? Elena's smile was sad but knowing. Because 3 days ago, something extraordinary happened in this city. Someone, a street artist, who's been silent for 3 years, created a new piece. And it's been making quite a stir in the art world. She pulled out her phone and showed Anya a photograph that made her heart stop. It was a massive mural on the side of a building in Brooklyn, and it was unmistakably Phantom's work. But this piece was different, rawer, more emotional than anything she'd ever seen from the mysterious artist. It showed two figures reaching for each other across a void, their fingertips almost touching, but not quite meeting. The pain and longing in the image was so visceral, it made her chest ache. "Where is this?" Anya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Williamsburg. It appeared Monday night." Elena's eyes held a knowing gleam. The same night, a certain tech CEO was seen wandering the streets until dawn, looking like a man who'd lost everything that mattered. Anya stared at the image, understanding flooding through her. Monday night, the night after their confrontation with Marcus, the night after Liam had walked away from her forever. He'd gone back to his art, to the only language he'd ever trusted to express what he couldn't say with words. "He's in pain," she whispered. "Yes, and so are you." Elena reached across and touched her hand gently. "But pain, my dear, is often the catalyst for the most beautiful art, and sometimes for the most profound love. He doesn't trust me anymore. He thinks everything between us was a lie. Then show him it wasn't." Elena stood, leaving the portfolio on the table. "Your father believed that art could heal anything. Broken hearts, broken trust, broken dreams. Perhaps it's time to test that theory." After Elena left, Anya sat alone with the revelations crashing over her like waves. Everything she'd believed about her past, about Marcus, about the connections between her father and Liam, had been rewritten in the space of an hour. But more than that, she finally understood what she had to do. The next morning, she stood before the building in Williamsburg, staring up at Liam's mural in the gray dawn light. It was even more powerful in person, 15 feet of raw emotion that seemed to pulse with life. She could see his pain in every brushstroke, his longing in the way the figures reached for each other, his despair in the void that kept them apart. But she could also see hope, because the figures were still reaching, still trying to bridge the gap between them. Anya pulled out her phone and made a call that 3 weeks ago would have been unthinkable. Channel 7 Arts Review. "This is Anya Petrova. I have a story for you about Phantom, the mysterious street artist, and I think your viewers are going to want to hear it." By evening, news vans lined the street. Reporters thrust microphones at anyone who would talk, and art enthusiasts gathered in clusters discussing the significance of Phantom's return. Anya stood before the crowd that had assembled, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp night air. The art world lost one of its most important voices when Phantom disappeared. Tonight, I'm here to tell you why. She pulled out the portfolio Elena had given her, opening it to reveal the newspaper clippings and exhibition materials. "This story begins with my father, David Petrova, and a man named Marcus Reed, who destroyed his career out of jealousy and spite." A murmur went through the crowd as she explained the connection, as she revealed how Marcus had manipulated her, how he'd used her to get close to Liam. But most importantly, she told them about the mentorship between her father and a lost 17-year-old boy who would become the artist the world knew as Phantom. "Liam Parker," she said, her voice breaking slightly on his name, "is Phantom. And he stopped creating art 3 years ago because he thought he'd lost the right to it when tragedy struck his family. But art doesn't belong to tragedy, it belongs to hope. It belongs to love. It belongs to the belief that even when everything seems broken, beauty can still emerge from the ruins." She gestured to the mural behind her. "This piece appeared 3 days ago after Phantom's true identity was used against him by the same man who destroyed my father. It shows two people reaching for each other across an impossible divide. It's about the courage to keep reaching even when you're not sure the other person will reach back." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. "I'm standing here tonight because I am one of those figures," Anya continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm reaching across the void to tell the other one that I believe in what we almost had. I believe in the art that flows from his soul, in the man he is beneath the walls he's built, in the love that scared us both so much we almost let it slip away." She pulled out a key, the key to her father's gallery, and held it up. Tomorrow I'm reopening the Petrova Gallery, not to close the circle of the past, but to open a door to the future. A future where art and truth and second chances all have a place. Her eyes found the camera, knowing that somewhere in the city Liam might be watching. This is my grand gesture, Phantom. This is me telling the world that some things are worth fighting for, especially when everyone tells you to give up. She turned and walked toward the gallery van she'd rented, but stopped when she heard the sound of spray paint hitting brick. The crowd turned as one to look at the building behind them, where a figure in dark clothes and a hood had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Even from a distance, even with his face hidden, Anya knew it was him. She could tell by the way he moved, by the confident strokes as he added to his own mural. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Phantom worked, adding new elements to the piece that had already captured their imagination. When he finished and stepped back, a collective gasp went up from the assembled observers. He had painted a bridge between the two reaching figures, not solid, but made of delicate threads of color that seemed to shimmer in the streetlight. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. A connection across the void. The hooded figure turned toward the crowd, toward Anya, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. Then he was gone, disappeared into the shadows as mysteriously as he'd appeared, leaving behind only the evidence of his faith in second chances. Anya stood there with tears streaming down her face, staring up at the bridge of hope he'd painted between them. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was an answer to her gesture, a sign that maybe, just maybe, love could survive even the deepest betrayal. As the crowd began to disperse and the news vans packed up their equipment, Anya remained standing beneath the mural, studying every detail of the bridge Liam had painted. Tomorrow she would reopen her father's gallery. Tomorrow she would try to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything they'd lost. But tonight she stood beneath a work of art that whispered a possibility, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to hope that the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain, and sometimes love finds a way to build bridges across even the most impossible divides. The Petrova Gallery buzzed with energy that hadn't filled its walls in years. Opening night had exceeded every expectation Anya had dared to harbor. The space was packed with art lovers, critics, collectors, and curious onlookers who'd heard about the dramatic revelation of Phantom's true identity. The walls, freshly painted and professionally lit, showcased a mixture of her father's recovered work and pieces by emerging artists who believed in second chances. But despite the success swirling around her, Anya's eyes kept drifting to the entrance, hoping against hope that the one person who mattered most would walk through those doors. It had been a week since the night at the mural, a week since Liam had painted that delicate bridge of possibility between them. She'd caught glimpses of him around the city, a figure in expensive suits hurrying into office buildings, a shadow disappearing around corners, but he hadn't sought her out, hadn't returned her calls. The bridge was there, shimmering with promise, but neither of them had been brave enough to cross it. Quite a turnout. Elena Volkov appeared at her elbow, elegant as always in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Your father would be so proud. I hope so. Anya smoothed her hands down the emerald green dress she'd chosen for the evening. Not one of the designer pieces from her time as Liam's fake girlfriend, but something that felt authentically her. Elena, thank you for everything. Without you, I never would have known the truth. Truth has a way of surfacing when it's needed most, Elena said with a mysterious smile. Though I should mention you might want to check the east wall. Something interesting has developed there. Confused, Anya made her way through the crowd toward the back of the gallery. The east wall had been left intentionally empty. She'd planned to feature rotating installations there, spaces for artists to create in real time. But now she stopped short, her heart hammering against her ribs. Someone had been painting. The mural covered nearly the entire wall, and it was unmistakably Phantom's work. But this wasn't the raw, emotionally charged piece from Williamsburg. This was something softer, more hopeful. It showed the same two figures from the bridge mural, but now they'd crossed the divide and were standing together, their hands intertwined, looking out at a cityscape that pulsed with life and color. But it was the corner signature that made her breath catch, not just the familiar P for Phantom, but LP, written in elegant script beside it, and below that words that made her eyes fill with tears. For David Petrova, who taught me that art is love made visible, and for his daughter who taught me that love is worth the risk. You found it. T? The voice behind her was quiet, uncertain, and so achingly familiar that she had to close her eyes for a moment before turning around. When she did, Liam was standing there in his perfectly tailored black suit, but something was different. The rigid posture was gone, the corporate mask had slipped, and in his eyes she saw not the calculating CEO, but the vulnerable artist who'd spent years hiding from his own heart. When did you? She started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the simple fact that he was here. I've been working on it all week. Your security system is surprisingly easy to bypass, he said with the ghost of a smile. I wanted it to be ready for tonight. They stood there in the crowded gallery, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the clink of wine glasses, but it felt like they were alone in their own bubble of possibility. Liam, she began, but he held up a hand. Let me go first, please. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling, and somehow that small imperfection made him seem more real than he had in weeks. I've spent the last week thinking about what you said that night, about how you felt. And I've spent 3 years thinking I'd lost the right to create, to feel, to hope for anything beyond the next quarterly report. He gestured to the mural behind her. But then you stood up in front of cameras in the world and fought for something you believed in. You fought for us when I was too afraid to believe we were worth fighting for. You weren't afraid, Anya said softly. You were hurt. There's a difference. I was both. His smile was rueful. But watching you take that risk, seeing you put your heart on the line for something as uncertain as love, it reminded me of something your father told me years ago. Like my father. He said that the most beautiful art comes from the courage to be vulnerable, to show the world who you really are beneath all the armor. Liam stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. I've been wearing armor for so long I forgot who I was underneath it. And who are you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone who falls asleep thinking about the way you laugh. Someone who sees colors differently when you're in the room. Someone who's been half alive for 3 years until a stubborn, beautiful woman taught him that love isn't something you earn, it's something you choose every day, even when it's terrifying. The words hung between them like a bridge of their own, delicate and strong at the same time. Around them, the gallery hummed with life, but Anya was aware only of the man standing before her, finally letting her see past all his carefully constructed walls. I choose you, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. Not as part of a contract or a business arrangement or a performance for investors. I choose you because when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before life taught me that wanting things was dangerous. Liam. Her voice broke on his name. I love you, he said simply. I love your passion and your stubborn streak and the way you see art in places other people see only walls. I love that you fought for this gallery and for your father's legacy, and for us even when I was too scared to fight alongside you. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. I love you too. I have for weeks probably, since that first night, when you tried to buy my photos and I saw past the CEO mask to the artist underneath. Even knowing what you know now about Marcus, about the manipulation, about how this all started, especially knowing that, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Because it means you chose me too in the end. Not because you had to, not because of a contract, but because of who we are when we're together. He covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek like it was something precious. I have a proposition for you, Ms. Petrova. Despite the emotion of the moment, she laughed. Another contract. No contracts this time. Just a promise. His eyes were serious now, intense in a way that made her breath catch. I promise to be real with you, to let you see all the broken parts and the messy edges. I promise to create art that matters, to honor your father's memory and his teachings. And I promise to love you, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. And what do you want in return? The same promises from you. And maybe. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made her heart stop. Not a ring, it was too soon for that, they both knew, but a key. Maybe you'd consider letting me help you run this place. As a partner. In every sense of the word. Anya stared at the key, understanding flooding through her. This wasn't just about the gallery. It was about building something together, creating a future that honored the past while embracing the possibilities ahead. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. He swept her into his arms, then spinning her around in the middle of the crowded gallery, and she laughed with pure joy as the world blurred around them. When he set her down, they were both laughing, both crying, both transformed by the simple act of choosing love over fear. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena Volkov's voice cut through the noise of the crowd, and Anya looked around to realize that their entire emotional reunion had attracted an audience. I believe we're witnessing the birth of not just a new gallery, but a new artistic partnership. Perhaps Mr. Parker would like to say a few words about the mural. For a moment, Liam looked panicked, but Anya squeezed his hand and nodded encouragingly. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd, still holding her close. 3 years ago, I thought I had lost the right to call myself an artist. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the space. Tonight, thanks to this woman and this gallery and the memory of David Petrova, I've remembered that art isn't about earning the right to create. It's about having the courage to show the world what love looks like. The crowd erupted in applause, but Anya was aware only of the man beside her, the way he stood straighter now, as if he'd finally stopped carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. As the evening wound down and the last guests filtered out into the New York night, Anya and Liam stood together in front of his mural, their hands intertwined, looking at the future he'd painted for them. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure it out as we go," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But together this time. No contracts, no performances, no armor. Just us." "Just us," she agreed, then smiled. "Though I should probably mention that the Artemis group called this afternoon." Liam went still. "What did they say?" Catherine Artemis said they'd been following the news coverage, and they're more interested than ever in partnering with a CEO who has the courage to be vulnerable in public. Apparently, authenticity is exactly what they were looking for. His laugh was pure relief and joy. "So we get the fairy tale ending, after all." "Better than a fairy tale," Anya said, turning in his arms to face him fully. "We get the real thing." As he leaned down to kiss her, surrounded by art and possibility and the promise of tomorrow, Anya thought about how wrong Marcus had been. Some people did get fairy tale endings, not because they were perfect, but because they were brave enough to fight for love, even when it seemed impossible. And sometimes, if they were very lucky, they found someone willing to fight alongside them. Outside the gallery windows, the city hummed with its endless rhythm of hope and heartbreak, dreams and disappointments. But inside, in the warm glow of the gallery lights, two people who'd lost themselves in the armor they'd built were finally learning how to be vulnerable together. The mural on the east wall would become famous in the coming months, studied by art historians and reproduced in magazines around the world. But Anya and Liam would always know it not as Phantom's masterpiece, but as the moment they chose love over fear, truth over performance, and each other over everything else. Some contracts, after all, were worth breaking, and some promises were worth keeping forever.